Well, Evan, I would like to drill a little deeper here in the idea of enhancing collaborative decision making in virtual teams. So I have two or three questions here along the lines of decision making specifically. In your experience, what are the critical elements for fostering collaborative decision making in virtual teams? What's that look
Well,
like?
well, one of the most important, if you will, critical elements is to make sure we're hearing from everyone. Now, when I say everyone, we over-invite people, right? There's
Hmm.
too many people there, right? And that is a cultural issue. So if we're really clear why we're doing something, what we're doing, we then need to think very practically about who should be there and what roles we really need them to play. So people over invite. But if we're going to get the right experts together, the next challenge we have is how do we hold space so we're hearing from everyone, right? So that's one of the critical elements for collaboration. In a virtual setting, it is hard to get people to engage. It is really hard, especially if there's mixed hierarchy. And people are always going to be, the political dynamics are always going to be there. Just as for your listener, a very simple tool in a virtual environment. And it sounds, obvious. One of the neat things about working virtually is you have the chat function. Mhm. And often what we do with the group to make sure we hear from everyone is simply pose a question, give people time to respond in the chat without entering their thoughts initially. That is, submitting them to the group. So they get a chance to type them into the chat.
Hmm.
Then we have everyone submit simultaneously. What this does is hold space for all voices, creates tension so the people who are less likely to talk not only have space and they have to talk, and it allows in this just simple way to make sure every single person is heard because often it, as we said earlier, are those junior people, right, who have the expertise to help the group make the better decision, but they never get to voice it. So the chat is really, in many ways, something that can allow you to ensure everyone's talking. And that's just a very simple thing. And a critical element is to make sure everyone gets to weigh in. Because if people don't weigh in, I think Patrick Lencioni said it, they aren't going to buy in.
Yeah, great point, Seven. I really appreciate it. And you mentioned this idea of everyone needs to buy in or everybody needs to be able to participate, right? Or as you had mentioned, hold space, right? I love that term. I love that word. You need to hold space for everybody. And earlier you were sharing with our listeners the idea of setting up the agenda, right? The discipline when you go into a meeting to do it deliberately and with intent. And by thinking about the purpose, the objectives, the process, roles, agreement, decisions that have to be made. But that doesn't just come overnight, right? I mean, that usually that is something that it's not just an awareness team for perhaps, organizational leadership or management, but it's something that also takes intent. That training and that practicing of becoming more effective is a deliberate thing that you need to work on. So how does Schwartz and Associates training methods ensure effective agenda design and prevent the common pitfalls in virtual meetings?
Well, and we run an intensive program, right? And it is a 4-day intensive with 12 people, 2 instructors, and it's run on 2 consecutive days and 2 consecutive weeks. Now, senior people are not going to take that much time, right? They're busy, even though I'd invite them to consider the fact they're the ones showing what mediocre meetings look like, which then creates the culture of the organization. But I always invite senior people to come watch the 4th day because 4-day program, 2 hours of lecture. No one's interested in lecture. The program itself is all practice. And, sometimes a senior person will come observe for a few hours and say, I love this. All my people doing agile, all my people doing continuous improvement, lean Six Sigma type stuff, all my people doing internal transformation and change need these skills because these are change skills, right? They're not meeting skills. And what they'll say to me, Evan, I love this, but I can't take my people offline for 4 days. What I want from you is 10 videos. I'll give you all the hours, 2-hour videos that my people can watch on their computer, self-paced learning, like a master class. And I always say to them, I'm not interested. Go find someone else who's going to waste your time and money because if people don't practice, there's no skill transfer. And I'll say to them, did you have kids who learn to drive? And they'll say, yeah, of course. And I'll say, would you have ever let your kids watch 10 videos on how to drive and hand them the car keys or 10 videos on how to swim and push them in the deep end. You would never do this, but in this day and age, right, people want a quick fix. We do not learn by watching or listening things. We have to get our hands dirty. And the vast majority of our program is putting people on the spot, on the hot seat, requiring they practice, right, giving them intensive feedback and coaching, and they'll get videotape because, as you said earlier, we can learn a lot just watching ourselves on video because we see exactly what a group is experiencing in our leadership. And so what really we believe in many ways, is just an old school action learning where we get people doing things, give them intensive coaching and feedback, and that's how we get skill transfer. And so 4 days sounds like a lot to people. And the math for senior people, man, it's daunting. Most senior people are going to spend 50% of their time in meetings because the more senior we are, the more major decisions are being made and they have to be politically socialized and they're going to take a form of a meeting. But if you're spending 50% of your time in meetings, you will literally, if you're only working 8-hour days, spend a year's worth of your life in meetings in under 9 years. And if you have a 30, 40-year career, you may spend 4 or 5 years of your life in meetings. They have to go well because that's where the culture of an organization starts, because we're going to spend so much time in meetings. And
Yeah.
so that's really what we're trying to do, is real practice, real skill transfer. And it takes time and it takes being worked.
Yeah. And Evan, I actually want to ask you 2 or 3 questions regarding culture, as you'd mentioned, as that's where culture starts, right, is in these meetings. But before we go there, what advice do you have for PE firms looking to enhance collaborative skills in their portfolio companies?
Well, I mean, the reality is, and we all know, the CEO sets the culture of the organization. And so, what I would invite PE firms to think about is perhaps we may not get the C team to do something like this, right? They can't take the time. But anyone in change agent roles, right? If they're big enough to be doing agile for software development, or they're trying to run some continuous improvement process, lean, Six Sigma, that type of stuff, or they have an internal change group. Those people become really the change agents for the organization. So one of the things you'd want to have is a cadre of leaders who are really good at facilitating high stakes meetings, who have this skill set. A leader themselves, it would be great if they had this skill set, because many leaders are trained to be subject matter experts, right? They bring expertise, they're used to making decisions for the group. The real art, though, and that is what we're teaching in many ways, is a lost art, is can you get a group of people to come together, even if you have strong opinions, make a decision, a good decision, a great decision, get them to buy in. And that requires, in that, going back to that continuum, to be able to be more neutral and certainly not impose your will on the group, and certainly maybe wait before you offer your expertise, right? So that people can step up. But to your question, I think you have to have a cadre of change agents who are good at facilitating collaboration, and they become role models for the culture of the organization.
So, Evan, you mentioned, CEOs or CXOs rather, they often can't take the time to participate in this type of exercise or training. What do you see? What is the trigger point or maybe the pain point for organizations that inspire them to reach out Schwartz and Associates to begin with? I mean, at what point, it starts with awareness, right? So somebody in that CXO team realizes, hey, look, we just are not doing a good job. Maybe our culture is not where it needs to be. We're running bad meetings. So they clearly recognize a need for that improvement. Is that what it is? Is that what drives them to reach out to Evan and say, hey, come on in and help us out? Where's that
Yeah.
wake up call?
Well, I mean, the reality, as I said in the beginning, earlier in my career, I was doing cultural transformation consulting. Now, I'm a middle-aged white guy, turned 60 on, next Monday. And so as I've
Happy
gotten
birthday.
older, thank you, not quite there yet. I'm not sure it's going to be a happy one hitting 60. But, as I've gone later in my career, I've shut down consulting. And I just love the practice of teaching people how to do this for themselves. But the wake up call, I've asked clients for 30 years 2 questions. The first one is, how many meetings does your organization have in a day? And of course, that's depending on the size of the organization. But a large company with 100,000 people, when they think of the one-on-ones, they may have 500,000 meetings in a day. And
Yeah.
so the second question I've asked them is, what's the average effectiveness of the meetings you attend? And 0 to 100%, I've had two clients in 30 years say 80%, right? I have a handful, not over two hands, say 70%. What I generally get is 50% or lower.
Mm.
And I just sit here with clients and say, this is insane, right? You're going to spend half your, years of your life in meetings. How can you tolerate this being 50, 40, 30% effective? And the reality is that people don't hate meetings, right? What they hate is wasting time.
Mm.
And so many meetings are a waste of time. And if I'm the one running all these mediocre meetings, and wasting people time, that is where my leadership reputation is being established. And so the pain point often is people sitting in these miserable meetings, which literally drains the productivity out of the organization, the life force out of the organization. Now, again, organizations need to figure out how to reduce the number of meetings. I'm not in that business. I'm in the business of showing them what great collaboration looks like in meetings that need to happen, right? Workshop type meetings, planning meetings, strategy meetings, and process redesign meetings. But the pain point is just the fact that we're in all these miserable meetings. And at some point, someone says, this is crazy. This is where the culture of the organization is being established. If we can intervene at the meeting level, right, and increase the performance just of the meeting themselves, we then start transforming the culture of performance of the organization. And so, the pain point is simply the misery of sitting in meetings.